My husband left me stranded in the cold rain, 50 miles from home while I was pregnant. That cruel moment wasn't just betrayal. It was the beginning of his own downfall, and he never saw it coming. He told me we were going for a drive just to clear our heads, maybe get away from the stress that had been sitting heavy between us for weeks. The kind of tension you don't say out loud but feel in every silence, every avoided glance. I was almost 5 months pregnant at the time, and my back hurt, and my feet ached, but I still smiled when he said, "Let's go." I thought maybe he was trying again. Maybe this was his way of showing he cared. We didn't talk much on the drive, just quiet music and the soft hum of the tires on the wet road. It had been raining since morning, the kind of slow, steady rain that feels like it has something to say. After about an hour, he pulled off the main highway down a road I didn't recognize, surrounded by woods and empty fields. I asked where we were going. He didn't answer right away, just said somewhere peaceful. I started to feel uneasy, not because I didn't trust him, not yet, but because the way he gripped the steering wheel looked different, tighter. His jaw was clenched like he was holding something in. When he finally stopped the car, we were on the side of a narrow road, nothing around, just trees and the gray sky dripping. He got out without saying a word. I called his name twice, but he didn't answer, just opened the trunk and stood there for a second like he was thinking something through. Then he came around, opened my door, and told me to get out. His voice was calm, too calm. I thought it was a joke, maybe a weird idea of a game. I laughed nervously and said, "What are you doing?" But he didn't smile. He said, "Get out," again, and this time louder. I asked why, what's going on, and he said, "I can't do this. I can't do you, this baby, this life." He said it like a confession, like he was ashamed, but also like it was final. He said, "I'm leaving and I need you to stay here for a while. Just think things through." I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. I said, "It's raining, I'm pregnant, and we're miles from anywhere," and he just looked at me like that didn't matter, like I was a problem he could walk away from. He got back in the car, and for a second, I stood there thinking he'd stop, thinking he'd laugh and say, "Just kidding." But he didn't. He closed the door, put the car in drive, and pulled away, and I watched the red of his brake lights disappear into the rain. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not at first. I just stood there, soaked and stunned, my hands on my stomach, like I had to protect her from what just happened. The rain didn't stop, and neither did the shaking in my knees. I looked down the road and saw nothing but gray. I was 50 miles from home, no phone, no coat, and the man who said he loved me had just left. Like I was nothing. Like the life growing inside me was nothing. I started walking because what else could I do? Each step felt heavier than the last, but I kept going one muddy step at a time. I didn't know then that this would be the moment that changed. Everything that walking through that rain would teach me more about myself than any love ever had, that his choice to leave wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something he couldn't even imagine. I kept walking even when the rain soaked through my clothes and the wind bit at my skin, even when my shoes filled with mud and my ankles ached with every step. I didn't look back because there was nothing behind me worth seeing, only the echo of a car that had chosen to forget me. I talked to the baby inside me to keep calm, whispering things like, "We're okay. We're strong. We're going to be fine." Even if I wasn't sure if any of it was true. After what felt like hours, a truck finally passed by. I waved frantically, my arms heavy and trembling. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, pulled over and asked what happened. Her voice cracked through the storm like a life raft. I told her bits and pieces enough for her to understand. I needed help. She didn't ask too many questions, just gave me a blanket from her backseat and said, "Let's get you warm, sweetheart." She took me to the nearest hospital and stayed with me until the nurses took over. She even gave them her number in case I needed anything. At the hospital, they checked me and the baby. Everything was fine physically, but my mind was spinning, replaying every moment, every word he had said, trying to make sense of why someone who once held me so gently could abandon me like I was a burden too heavy to carry. The nurses were kind. One even held my hand when I broke down in the exam room. She didn't say much, just let me cry like she knew words couldn't fix what had broken. The police came and I told them what happened. They called it abandonment, but said there wasn't much they could do without proof that I was in danger. I didn't care about legal action. I just wanted to go home to my tiny apartment, to my bed and my books and my clothes that still smelled like the life I thought I was building with him. When I got home, the silence hit different. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like something had been scraped out of the walls. I sat on the floor for hours, not moving, not crying, just trying to exist, trying to feel like I was still real and not just the aftermath of someone else's decision. Days passed, then weeks. People reached out, friends, family, even his sister, who said she couldn't believe what he'd done. She brought groceries, sat with me while I slept on the couch, helped me get to doctor appointments slowly. I started putting myself back together, one meal, one shower, one step at a time. I signed up for a parenting class at a local center, mostly to feel like I was doing something, like I still had control over part of this journey. The other moms were kind. They didn't ask too many questions, just welcomed me in as one of them. We shared fears and dreams and awkward laughter over swollen feet and midnight cravings. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I could do this even if the path had changed. He never called, never came back, not even a message, and maybe that was a gift. Maybe his silence gave me the space I needed to hear myself again, to remember that my story didn't end in the rain. It started there, and I had a new chapter to write. The days blurred together in a haze of doctor visits, quiet dinners alone, and long walks that ended with me talking to my daughter like she could already hear and understand me. I would place my hands on my belly at night and tell her stories, not of fairy tales, but of strength, of survival, of starting over. I'd tell her about rain and how sometimes it washes away things that were never meant to stay. One afternoon, while shopping for baby clothes, I ran into someone from our old circle, a mutual friend of his, a man named Kevin, who always used to come to our gatherings with his wife. He looked surprised to see me alone, his eyes drifting to my belly, then back to my face trying to piece together the silence. I didn't tell him everything, just said that he was gone, and I was figuring things out. Kevin nodded and said, "If you ever need anything, just ask. People say that a lot." I noticed, but Kevin meant it. Later that week, he showed up with a box of baby supplies he and his wife had stored away from their firstborn, tiny socks, blankets, bottles. He said they'd been saving it for someone who needed it, and I broke down right there in my doorway, not because of the stuff, but because of the gesture. Someone cared, someone still saw me. As the months went on, I started documenting my journey, not for others, but for myself, writing it all down in a journal, every heartbeat, every kick, every appointment. I poured it onto the pages because I needed something to hold on to when the nights got too quiet, when the walls started to feel like they were closing in. One evening, a letter came in the mail, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was his. Inside was a note, barely a paragraph, saying he was sorry, that he hoped I was okay, and that he wasn't ready to be a father. He hoped someday I'd forgive him. I read it twice and then set it on fire, not out of anger, but because I didn't want his words to have space in my home. I went into labor late one night after a quiet dinner and an old movie. The pain started slowly, then quickly became a storm. My neighbor drove me to the hospital, holding my hand the whole way. The nurses moved fast, calm and focused, and I held on with everything. She was born just after 3 a.m., her cry loud and fierce, like she already knew she was meant to fight. They placed her in my arms, and the world tilted, not in fear or loss, but in awe. She looked at me like she'd been waiting for this moment too. I whispered, "Welcome home." And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I named her Eliana. It means God has answered, and in some way, I felt like he had not, by giving me the family I thought I wanted, but by giving me the strength to survive the one I didn't. Raising her became my world, every sleepless night, every bottle, every tiny laugh that filled the apartment with joy. I didn't know I still had in me, and slowly, I built a new life, one that wasn't defined by his leaving, but by everything I found after he was gone. Months passed like shifting clouds, heavy with everything I had endured, and yet lightened by every breath she took beside me. Eliana was growing fast, her eyes already scanning the world with the kind of curiosity that reminded me how life continued no matter what you lost. I started to smile again, first out of habit, then with meaning. I would watch her sleep and wonder what kind of world she would inherit, and what kind of woman I needed to become to guide her through it. The apartment began to reflect the two of us more than anything from before. I painted the walls soft colors and framed photos of her milestones. Her first smile, her first steps, the day she reached out and grabbed my hand like she knew she was never letting go. We didn't have much, but we had enough. The laughter we shared became the music that filled our days, and in the quiet of the evenings, I would write again, not just in my journal, but letters to her. Letters she would one day read when she asked questions about why her father wasn't in her life. But just as I began to believe we had stepped away from the shadow of the past, a letter arrived, this time not from him, but from a lawyer. It was formal, cold, stating that he wanted to establish parental rights, that he wanted to meet Eliana. My breath caught the letter, shaking in my hands, not out of fear, but from the surge of every emotion I thought I had buried. How dare he return now, after leaving me in the rain, after vanishing from our lives when we needed him most? I consulted my own lawyer and kept everything documented. Every page of the journal, every hospital form, every text. He never replied to. I wasn't going to let him walk back in just because he finally felt guilt, or maybe pressure from his family, or worse, loneliness. He had signed away more than just our relationship that day he drove away in the rain. He had abandoned his daughter before she ever got to know his name. Weeks turned into tense waiting. Eliana sensed the change. Even if she couldn't understand it, she clung to me tighter. Her sleep grew restless, and I sang her lullabies longer at night to calm her as much as to calm myself. I kept the world small again, just the two of us, hoping the storm would pass without crashing through our door. Then the court date came. I stood across from him for the first time since that rainy day. He looked older, tired, and not just from time, but from the weight of choices that had finally caught up with him. He tried to smile, tried to speak to me before the hearing began, but I turned away, not from hatred, but from strength, because I had built something stronger than what he tried to destroy. The judge listened, the lawyer spoke, and I answered every question with clarity, not once wavering, not once letting the fear speak. For me, I had lived in silence once before. I would not do it again. Eliana's best interests, that was the heart of it all, and I made it clear that this child did not need someone who ran. She needed someone who stayed. The decision wasn't made that day, but I walked out of that courtroom holding her tighter than ever, and when we got home, I read to her from our journal the story of how we came to be, not from perfection, but from persistence, from survival, from love, so rooted in truth that not even the past could rip it apart. The days after the hearing dragged on like slow-moving tides, each moment soaked in uncertainty. I watched Eliana play on the rug with her stuffed animals, creating tiny worlds where everything was safe and everyone stayed. I wished I could promise her the same in real life. I wish I could bottle that kind of certainty and keep it in her pocket forever. My lawyer called me. Every few days, updates were slow motions, filed reviews delayed, and still no ruling. The waiting was its own kind of trial. I tried to stay strong, but there were nights when I stood at the window long after Eliana had fallen asleep, wondering how a man who once claimed to love me could bring this storm to our doorstep. And then he called. I saw his name flash on the screen and my hands froze. I let it ring through the first time, then again. I answered on the third call, my voice calm though. My heart raced faster than any word could match. He said he just wanted to talk. He sounded different. Quieter, more unsure than I had ever known him. He told me he made a mistake, not just leaving, but pretending he could stay gone, that he felt something shift when he saw Eliana in court, said she looked like me, and it broke him. I listened, but said nothing because there was nothing to say that could undo what had been done. He asked if he could see her not through court, but just us, just a meeting. I told him we would wait for the judge's decision, that I would protect her peace even if he had found his regret. That night I couldn't sleep. Eliana stirred too, like she felt the weight of the conversation in the air. I sat beside her crib, stroking her hair, whispering stories of strength and beginnings. I had once dreamed of a life with him full of shared joy and mourning, coffees and lullabies sung together, but I had also imagined a man who wouldn't abandon us in a storm, and dreams that fragile cannot survive reality. A week later, the ruling arrived in a plain envelope, the words clear and final. He was denied full custody and granted supervised visitation only. The court acknowledged abandonment, the psychological toll on both me and Eliana, and the years of absence weighed heavier than his. Last-minute change of heart? I cried when I read it, not out of joy or revenge, but from release, the final break in a chain I had carried too long. I told Eliana gently, and though she didn't understand the words, I held her, and she smiled as if something deep inside her felt lighter too. His first visit came the next month, supervised in a room with toys and 2 caseworkers. He walked in holding a teddy bear and sat on the far side of the room. Eliana stayed close to me, unsure, watching him like he was a shadow from a dream that didn't quite belong. She didn't reach for him. She didn't speak to him. And when the hour was up, she clutched my finger like it was the only truth she had ever needed. As we left, he called after us, not angry, not pleading, just a whisper. I'm sorry I didn't turn around, not out of pride, but because I had already walked too far from that version of my life to look back. When we got home, I made tea, lit a candle, and opened our journal. I added a new entry, not about pain or past, but about how endings come in layers and how sometimes justice feels like breathing again after holding your breath for years. The sun outside was soft and golden when I finally allowed myself to open the windows and let the breeze move freely through our home, as if Eliana and I were no longer hiding from ghosts or rainstorms or echoes from the past. I watched her playing with her building blocks, lining them up carefully like she was designing a world of her own, with walls that stayed and doors that never slammed shut behind her. My body had begun to heal from the pregnancy, but the invisible bruises, the ones on my heart, took longer. Some nights I still reached out in sleep, expecting a presence that was long gone, only to find silence and stillness beside me, but even that silence was now comforting because it was honest. I had learned that peace does not always come with smiles. Sometimes it arrives in the form of being left alone by the ones who once brought storms. I had started attending a local support group once a week. Other women who had walked through fire and somehow emerged not unburned but unbroken. We would sit in a circle with coffee and tissues and stories that overlapped and diverged, and I found pieces of myself in their words, in their laughter, in their strength. It reminded me I was not alone, and that healing was not a straight line but a winding path with both ditches and sunlight. Eliana began to say new words. Mama, night sky bunny. She pointed at the moon with wonder and reached for my hand in crowded places, and once during a nap she murmured my name in her sleep. And I felt like the world had paused to let that sound echo just for me. Her love was undiluted, pure, and it wrapped around every scar I carried like a balm. There was a letter one day from his lawyer. He was moving out of state, something about a job opportunity and needing space. I read it twice, then folded it away and placed it in a box along with ultrasound photos, a torn apology note, and a pair of baby socks that never got worn. Not out of bitterness, but because those chapters had already been written and closed. We planted a tree in the backyard on what would have been our anniversary. Eliana helped scoop the dirt with her tiny hands, giggling as the wind played with her curls. I whispered to the roots, "May you grow taller than pain and deeper than memory." It felt like something sacred, a ceremony of farewell and of choosing life forward. That night, I wrote in our journal again, not about him, but about us, about resilience and the quiet magic of starting over, about how sometimes survival is the most radical form of love, about how I would teach Eliana to trust her voice, her worth, her fire, and to never wait in the rain for someone who does not come back. And as I tucked her in and kissed her forehead, I realized I was no longer looking back, not even in dreams. The past had lost its grip, and we were free, finally, fully, beautifully free.